Okay, awesome. Jubin started recording. All right, we're live. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Rachel and I'm the president of PreMedCC, a student-led organization that was established in the fall of 2021. Our goal was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities with the hope of guiding our next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians. From the comfort of wherever you are, our weekly sessions allow you to connect with experts in the field, gain insight on how to prepare for the MCAT, and manage your finances as a medical student. After you have attended our session today, you can log onto our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today. And if you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you have attended the session today. Students that attend all of our sessions for the coming school year will be receiving a PreMedCC certificate for all your hours of shadowing and development as a pre-medical student. Our upcoming sessions for the next month or so are already on our website, so feel free to sign up for future events and follow us on our social media accounts if you guys want some updates. If you guys want to go ahead and share or turn on your camera, feel free, but I also want to give you guys the privacy to keep off your camera if you guys would like. That being said, I'm going to hand off the baton to Trinity to introduce our wonderful speaker today.
Hi, everyone. I will be doing the introductions today. So today I have the honor of introducing our speaker, Dr. Sunny Nakae. Dr. Nakae is a first-generation college student, graduate, and the only member of her family to earn advanced degrees. Dr. Nakae completed her BS and MSW at the University of Utah and later a PhD at Loyola University Chicago. She has had a variety of medical school admissions roles at Loyola University Chicago, Northwestern, University of Utah, and UC Riverside. She is currently the Senior Associate Dean for Equity, Inclusion, Diversity, and Partnership, and Associate Professor of Medical Education at the California University of Science and Medicine. Beyond her career, Dr. Nakae is passionate about increasing equity in higher education for undocumented and minority students and trainees. Her scholarship centers on the access, equity, and diversity of pre-medical preparation. She is also passionate about a variety of other social justice movements. Furthermore, she is dedicated to her family, which includes her partner, 3 children, and 2 dogs. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Nakae.
Thank you, Trinity, for that introduction. It's always slightly awkward to have to like sit there while folks read your bio, but it's part of what we do, right? So I am going to talk a little bit about my book today and give a little bit of a story about my book, and then provide some advice specifically for first-gen students, some of which is in my book. And then also, if we have time and you have questions, I'll highlight some of the areas of the application that really point to or give committees information about socioeconomic status and generation status. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. So now that you've got this, I'm also going to be using Slido today so that this will be interactive. You won't just have to listen to me yak for an hour. So just so we can all see I didn't get to see the results of the poll. So if you can scan this QR code on your phone and it'll open your default browser and take you into the poll, or you can go to slido.com and then just enter the code 1 and then gen for first gen, the number 1 and then gen. And then once we start voting and people join the poll, I'll let you see the results. So this is just a warm-up question so you get the hang of joining the Slido poll. Some of them are free texts and some of them are like voting and things like that, just so that we can make this interactive. And I'm not sure, let's see how many people. Let's see, participants. Okay, so 15. And it's all anonymous, by the way, and we don't save any of the information. So you can just, don't worry if you don't want to be identified by what you answer in the poll. Okay, so as you all answer, it'll start to populate. I think we have 15 participants, so hopefully a couple more people can join. If you don't manage to join on this slide because you're like driving or something, you can join when it comes up each time. It'll have the code and the QR code. So, okay, so most of you are second year or third year in college right now. Okay, awesome. Okay, so what comes to mind when you think of first gen and pre-med? What are some words that would come to mind? It's the word cloud. Okay, dedicated, determined, exciting, overwhelmed, hardworking, absolutely. Exciting, excitement. Behind the 8 ball, okay, strong. Confused, passion. Unknown, committed. Oh, I think confused and passion went together, okay. All right. Oh, a few more here. Let's see. Passionated, is that like passionately opinionated? Lonely, okay. Yeah, passionate. Okay. That definitely resonates with my experience in working with students. It's a very mixed array of like strengths and also deep challenges. So what is the greatest strength that you have as a first gen pre-med, do you think? What is your biggest asset or strength right now? And I'm going to ask this instead of barriers, because I think we focus too much on barriers, and we will talk about them because they inevitably come up. But I think hearing about some of our strengths is important. Resourceful, I love that one. Insight, sure. Maybe up close and personal to social challenges or family issues the way that other students might not be. Disciplined, no preconceived ideas, so ready to learn without bias. Perseverance and dedication, grit, resilience, I love it. Absolutely. These are great answers. That has definitely been my experience as well, both personally and then in having the privilege of working with so many students. I still even have these moments where I'm like, how is this in my life right now? Because it just feels like such a departure from how I was raised and how I grew up. And my family still doesn't really know what I do. So to be fair, you truly want it. Nobody's telling you to choose medicine. Yeah, you on the one hand, it's sort of a bummer not to have expectations that are steep and lofty imposed on you. But on the other hand, it's also very freeing because you know that your decisions are local and are your own. Sure. Helping people as their first gen students. Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my book, not to bore you, but just actually because I think it tells the story of me as a first gen professional, like first gen student, and then first gen professional, and then first gen author. Because, I thought, okay, I'm doing things I've never done before. And that sort of felt like all of college. And then when I was going through my master's, I felt like the same thing. And then going through my PhD, I felt like the same thing. I told one of my mentors, this feels like an academic blizzard because I know I'm moving, but I'm not really sure if I'm going in the right direction and I don't know where the end is, especially when I was in the writing phase. And my partner at the time just kept asking so when are you going to be done? And what about this? And I just said, I don't know. Here's what they say. Here's what I've been told I can expect, but I don't actually know what it looks like, right? So then becoming a first gen professor and a first gen author, all of these things of doing them again, I use a lot of the same strategies for success. So my journey to authorship was really born out of wanting to disseminate good advice and wanting to give practical advice in a really loving and connected way. And working with students over the years, what I really was able to do is take the stories and the things that those students taught me and give it back to students in the form of a story. So the book is really your book, right? It's really the wisdom that I was able to gain from students being willing to share their stories with me. And it kind of started a little bit of as a joke of, I would put like funny little tidbits of advice on Facebook. Your friendly neighborhood admissions dean here, like, don't wear a gallon of perfume to your interview, thanks, bye, and a lot of my friends would just say like, oh, we love the admissions dean and we love all the advice. And some of it was, serious, but some of it was, very like exasperated moments. But I thought maybe I'll write a book because I'm spending lots of time telling students the same things. And I'd love to make that advice more accessible. And so I asked my chair, I was an assistant professor at the time, I asked my chair, how do you write a book? And he's like, well, you just write it. And I said, you just send it to people? Do you have to have an agent? And he was like, no, you don't have to have an agent. You can just go to these different press websites and find out what their submission guidelines are and you submit it. And sometimes they ask for a sample or an outline of the chapters, and then you work with an editor and just try it. And I was like, all right, I didn't know that it was such an open process. So I wrote the book and I sent in the proposal, and then the editor was like, well, we like it, but I want you to revise it before I present it to my editorial board. So it was a lot of writing and revising and writing and revising. And actually my husband really pushed me to finish. He's like, so what's going on with that book of yours? And I'm like, oh, it's not, I'm just, and so he was like, you really need to finish it and get it done. And so then I got my first publishing contract. I have no idea if it's a good contract or not. They just sent it to me and I was like, you're going to publish my book? And I signed it. I didn't do any negotiation. I didn't know that I could. I had to work on the typesetting and the final edits and like proof the book as it was laid out. I had to do the index. Again, I have deep appreciation for the index of the book because the publishers do not do the index for you. So again, having to be resourceful, my partner was like, there's got to be a bunch of people that do this for a living if publishing houses don't do it. And I was like, that makes sense. So we look up indexing, and it turns out there's a whole society of professional indexers, and you can find them online. So I found this woman that lived in Santa Barbara that indexes books for a living. She literally gets paid to read books for a living, which I thought was pretty cool. So she read my book, and then we did some of the indexing together, like what types of themes, and finished that. And then finally it was proofed and shared. So it took about 2 years to really get it done. For the cover story, my editor at Rutgers, her name's Lisa, and she was like, we've got some cover art for you, really excited about it. I said, great. So then I opened the attachment. Oh my God. I kind of like had a very looks like an MCAT prep book. Like, I don't want my book to look like that. Like it doesn't, this isn't me at all. And then I thought, well, am I allowed to say like, this is terrible? Like, what are the rules here? Like, do I just have to accept? I've seen plenty of books that look like this. And my husband was like, well, no, you just like push back and say, that's not really what I had in mind, and like send some ideas. You already have this book contract, like they're not going to be that mad. And I was like, okay, I'll try to push back. So I asked, I want the font to be more casual and more approachable. I don't want it to seem so authoritarian. I want like a journey. I want warmth. Like I want color. Like, I want it to really reflect me, and I want it to reflect diverse pathways, right? And diversity, instead of just looking like a Kaplan or Princeton Review prep book with block letters. Just yuck. So then I tried to find some images on the internet, maybe something like this. And my book has things about reapplicants and postbac students and undocumented students. And I want something that is welcoming, And so she sent me, this is her iteration number 2. Hey, we discussed it and we get it. Like, we get that maybe we missed the mark. And then they sent me this picture, which is a stock photo, which I also was like, I don't want students to have to think that they need to wear scrubs and like wear stethoscopes around. And by the way, nobody's allowed to wear these kinds of shoes in the hospital. So what are you wearing sandals in the hospital for? And my mind immediately goes to like, who's missing, right? And are these like medical students don't usually wear this, they usually wear short coats. And I didn't want to connote this very narrow perspective about what it means to be a pre-med student. So I conveyed all that. I said, maybe something like this, another kind of, not a stock photo. I said, if we're going to use photos of real people, I'll ask my students to send me photos and we'll put all their faces on the cover instead, because I don't want it to be just random models. So I, was trying to brainstorm something like that really would convey togetherness, collectivism, like the things that the communities that I work with really represent in medicine, growth and success in the journey. So I sent some more ideas of just sort of, this is maybe what it could look like. And then she sent me this image and I was like, oh, it feels so much better. Like it's colorful and it represents a lot of diversity in a lot of different ways, but it's, nondescript, nicely nondescript. And I said, I really like it. I think it does have more of an upbeat feel, not so authoritarian. And originally they tried to go with the green and yellow, and I felt like it was like the Oregon Ducks, which, good team. I'm from Oregon, but it was a little like, ugh. So I wanted blue and green, and apparently you can't have that. You can only have green and yellow or blue and purple. So I chose the blue and purple. And we decided to go with this as a cover. So that's how I ended up choosing the cover of the book. But every step of the way, I was like, am I allowed to do this? You don't know the rules, right? You don't know if they're gonna make, you know what? You've been too much of a pain in the butt. We don't want to publish your book anymore. Like you just have no idea how much that you can push back, right? And that's part of the uncertainty of being a first generation anything, is maybe not having as much of a network to rely on, or people in your immediate family or circle who have done this before. So we went with the blue one and checked about credentials on the cover, and that's how we ended up with the book. So I want to talk a little bit now about the rules of the game. And part of the goal of this book was to put out there how you're going to be seen and measured, and give you admissions dean goggles to put on and to look at yourself through my eyes, which hopefully will make everyone take a very deep breath and relax and exhale and recognize that that I think you're amazing. I think applicants are amazing. I've loved working with them. Applicants are so hard on themselves and compare themselves to others way too much. And I really wanted to emphasize the authenticity and the experiences that we bring to the table are wanted and our strengths. So yes, the rules of the game, but also, authenticity. So the goal of the book was sort of, this is not a book about what you need to do to get it, right? It's not a strategy, get ahead, kind of cutthroat, dirty secrets kind of book. It's a, who do I need to be ready to be someone's doctor, right? That's very different than how do I get in? It's how do I get ready to take care of people for the rest of my life? What sort of person does that look like for me? So during the early days of COVID, my kids and I fought boredom mightily, them being out of school and being teenagers. So we made a little dark Monopoly game, and we had all of these chance and community chest cards, and we had the dark Monopoly. So we made a dependent card where you had to add a character and pay for your character to go around the board. And we had a pandemic card where you weren't allowed to collect rent. And then we had government relief. We had like, you got a rich uncle and you got $1,000. And we just put in all sorts of wild cards, right? Structural things that can happen to you. You got a huge hospital bill and you have to pay this. One of your things burned down and you forgot to pay the insurance, and we just came up with all sorts of things. There was a woman card where you only collected 75% of the rent that you were owed the whole time that you went around the board, right? So we sort of talked a lot about structural inequalities as well, and we made different rules of the game, and it changed 2-1. My son usually wins, and he didn't. I usually at least make it to I'm not usually the first one out. I got the dependent card. Completely knocked me out. I couldn't afford to pay all these expensive places my dependents wanted to land on around the board. So when you know the rules of the game, it gives you an advantage in being able to plan your journey and to take care of yourself and to have confidence moving forward about the choices that you're making. So here's a few spoilers from the book. So I want to hear from you now. What advice have you been given about GPA and pre-medical preparation? So you can either scan the QR code or just go to slido.com and enter the code 1Gen. But what is a general, you go into forums or you talk to academic advisors, what are the things that they usually tell you about the GPA? Four 4.0, yeah. 4.0 or you're just never going to get in. Pack it up, right? Has to be high, highest possible. Get the highest GPA you can get. Perfect MCATs, perfect GPAs. You have to be perfect. It is one of the most important things, sure. So we get a lot of these messages about how that GPA weighs so much, right? And so much of your whole world is riding on that GPA. It's a lot of pressure. It is true that med schools generally look at your GPA and your MCAT first before they look at the rest of your application, depending on how they do holistic review. Yes, often it's rigid, right? You can't repeat classes. There's no room for mistakes. You need to do the best you can the first time through. And so that feels really daunting, right? And it can be challenging to think, how do I even focus on learning when I'm also so focused on performance and even worse, like maybe perfectionism, right? Really getting in the way of that experience. So I like to say, be quick, but don't hurry. So go at a pace that will allow you to be successful, not just in how you perform in your classes, but in the learning that needs to happen so that you're prepared with a strong foundation in your basic sciences to learn to become a doctor. So while GPA is important, there's a huge percentage of students, I think 11% with GPAs above 3.8 and MCATs above 520 that do not get accepted. So that's nationally. 11% of applicants with those numbers don't get in anywhere they apply. And granted, they have high numbers, so they probably did apply to a lot of places and get a lot of interviews and just didn't get accepted, right? And then the next category of students with 3.8 and above and even like 515 MCATs, it's like 15% of the national applicant pool doesn't get a seat anywhere. So what that tells you is that your GPA won't get you in, right? You can't be like, I put all of my energy into being perfect. And I'm going to show up at Dean Nakai's door and say, look, here's my 4.0, give me my golden ticket to med school. It's not going to happen. So the GPA is not enough to get you in, right? But it can keep you out because committees are going to look at your entire academic record and determine what is the story behind this applicant. How have they grown? What have they learned? What have they changed? Have they done post-bac coursework? Did they do graduate coursework? Do they have an upward trend? Were there any particular courses that they struggled in that they showed strength in on their MCAT like section scores, right? So they're going to look at everything pretty holistically when it comes to looking at your record. But if it's really low, then it's hard to even get your application looked at in the first place, right? So two things around the GPA, performance, but also preparation. How does comparing yourself to others impact your confidence and progress? What happens when we compare ourselves to others? I did a podcast interview. It's called Talk to Mommy and Papi, and it's by this woman, I'm forgetting her last name. Juleka's her first name, but it's basically for like first-gen students and immigrant students, like bringing up topics that they weren't allowed to talk to their parents about. And then she sort of brings in experts. And so I was there to talk about an episode of a formerly undocumented Latina student who was taking a leave and needed to try to explain to her parents that she was taking a leave from her graduate program, health professions graduate program. And so the story I like to tell is when I first ran a 5K with my daughter. She was in fourth or fifth grade. And we had trained, we did this Girls on the Run club, running every single day after school and doing practices. And the whole season kind of culminates into this 5K. And it's a huge racetrack, like an automobile racetrack, right? There's people all over Chicagoland are coming, buses and buses of kids and running clubs from all over Illinois. And we set a goal that we were going to do our first 5K in 30 minutes. It's about a 10-minute mile pace, which is, relatively ambitious for younger kids. And I was like, okay, we're going to do this. So we're running and the track was so wide. It was like wider. It was like twice as wide as your average kind of city street. And so there were big groups of people running as clubs. And so we had to run around these big groups. So we would make some progress and then we'd have to like run around the big groups to kind of get through these big pods of people. And by the end of the race, I think we finished in like 31, 32 minutes or something like that. I took a screenshot of the time when we crossed the finish line. And I was like, oh, we didn't meet our goal. It's kind of a bummer, you know? So then I went back in and opened my running app later and saw that we had actually run 3.5 miles because we had run around so many obstacles this way towards our goal that we ran farther. And so us comparing our time to people who just ran the 5K didn't really make a lot of sense, right? And I think that's what we do sometimes when we make comparisons. If you're working, if you have caregiving responsibilities, if you have health challenges, if you have other emotional needs that you need to attend to and step back and take care of, if you have learning challenges or even just financial setbacks, family stuff, you look at other people and you're like, they're so much farther ahead than I am. They're doing better than I am, right? It's not helpful. And it kills a lot of joy too. So here's what you said. It makes it hard to be happy for people that do better than you on something because all you can see is your failure, not their success. Turns your peers into pure competition and not a sense of community. Absolutely. Like, again, it's a joy killer, big time. Being able to be genuinely happy for another person's success is really important. And we need to be in a good place for that to happen. There's a letter in my book that is to an applicant that didn't get in, right? A frustrated applicant. And it's kind of my assessment of how that applicant has fallen into a little bit of that, like, poor me. And I'm not happy for my friends that got in because their applications weren't as good as mine and they got seats and I didn't, right? So you do lose the reason why you're on the path. You can become so obsessed with keeping up with other people that you sort of forget, what do I want to get out of this process? Like, what do I need to do to get ready? Sometimes it can be motivating to compare yourself to other people, right? But at that point, sometimes it also becomes really defeatist. So that's a good point as well. Motivating or overwhelming. There is always going to be somebody better than you and somebody smarter than you and somebody who's gone on more global health trips than you. I mean, but again, if that's not your walk and that's not part of what's important to you, then that's okay, right? And schools are not looking for an exact cookie cutter of an applicant. They're looking for someone who's rooted in who they are and their purpose in medicine. It definitely diminishes confidence. You can have a huge fear of failure. Causes burnout, absolutely. We all have this compulsion to sort of feel like we're not enough, right? And it's that scarcity mindset of there's only so many seats in medical school and everybody's not going to get in and there's not enough. And so we end up getting pitted against each other. So it starts with there's not enough and actually goes full circle and hits us back and says, you're not enough. Right? So we don't want to engage in comparison. We want to offer affirmation and self-compassion and ways of managing our journey that allow for us to own it and say, this is where I'm at, right? Like, this is where I'm starting. I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. I'm moving forward and that's okay. I just met with a reapplicant a couple of days ago who was like, maybe I'll do a postbac program. This is the second time I've applied. I was before in my mindset, I would just like hurry up and like turn around my application and just resubmit it all over again. But he's like, now I'm actually thinking like, what do I need to do differently? And how can I, like, there's some things I want to explore about myself before I'm ready to reapply. So owning our journey, no matter what that means, if you're a career changer or an undocumented student, maybe you're a parent, maybe you've had health challenges, or you have different language in your home, your immigrant family, any of those things, medicine needs and are welcome for you to bring with you along the way. What do you think gives pre-meds a competitive edge? In my book, I have to call it the competitive edge, but my first draft, it was called the secret sauce because I thought that was more fun. Lisa didn't like it very much. so we ended up changing it to competitive edge, which I still kind of don't like. I would really rather call it the secret sauce or the magic sparkle or something that really helps you stand out. But if you could say what really helps someone, stand out, what gives you an edge in getting in? Family support, love that. Unique applications with unique extracurriculars, right? Money, unfortunately, yeah, finances can sometimes be a big part of it to be able to enact an application strategy that is that's effective. not working in school, involvement in your community. Yeah, having to work and managing those things is important. There's a lot of stories in my book about students who had to work, who had amazing insights from their professional and just work life experiences, being able to understand and relate to individuals from different walks of life. Many of my students got that from working at diners and working at fast food and coaching and being caregivers, even being like nurses or CNAs, patient transport, things like that. Having a unique story, okay, hopefully being first gen, I think so. Experience in a medical field, sure. Do you know what you're getting into? Do you have some experience either personally or with family members or in a job? Being good at one thing is better than being mediocre at many. I tend to agree that passion, a focused passion that can really be clearly demonstrated as a narrative that comes through in your application, is really important. So how do you have a unique story? How do you have unique activities and unique experiences? You start with who you are as a person, because no one is you. And you say, what brings me joy? What are my gifts? How do I want to make a difference in the world right now? Even just medicine aside, what makes me happy? And then you go and do that thing. You go and use your gifts and bring your own self-joy, making other people's lives better in the process. And that is a great recipe to have a good experience, to be able to get good feedback from the world around you and the people that you're working with. Am I in the right place? Is this a good path for me, right? And I like to just sit down with students and say, what do you like to do? They're like, well, I like to play tennis, or I like to sing, I enjoy cooking. Okay, let's figure that out. Can you play tennis for an adaptive sports league for individuals with mobility challenges or physical disabilities, right? Can you teach tennis to kids from neighborhoods where they don't have enough coaches in the parks and rec, right? Can you sing? What about starting a choir at a school or at a Head Start, or teaching music, or singing in a memory care facility to veterans or elderly folks who have been shown to have their moods improve and their health improved when they're exposed to music, right? Love cooking, cook at a soup kitchen, develop vegan recipes for donated food items that are used at the local soup kitchen to figure out how to make those things delicious, right? Figure out how to cook for people with specific allergies or different types of cultural needs, right? Like so many things you can do with what you love that makes the world better around you. And everything leads to health. Political action can improve health, right? Volunteering and cleaning up the environment can improve health. All of these things lead to the comprehensive nature of what contributes to the health of our communities. It doesn't have to be, I put on a vest and walked into the hospital and was in a healthcare facility in order to do something that really makes a difference and contributes to the world around you. So really, for me, I also like to say that growth, connection, systems thinking, and leadership. And I talk about all four of these things in my book because they're all really important. So the growth zone is a zone where you're working really hard because you actually might fail, right? You're at your edges. You're recognizing that's something that I need to do that's probably going to be pretty hard, right? You're challenging yourself. You're uncomfortable. Connection with other people. That genuine connection comes by showing up as your full self. So if you're just going through the motions and you're showing up as half of yourself because you're using a checklist mindset of, I got to get these hours in, I need to go volunteer for this relay or go collect XYZ, that genuine connection is not necessarily going to be there because you're not completely there, right? Systems thinking, there is a chapter on systems thinking in the book, or a section on systems thinking, which is a little bit complex, but I tried to break it down to be understanding the interconnectivity of the experiences that you're seeking and the systems that they're interacting with. And this is a precursor for structural competency, which we teach in medical school. Your patient comes in, they're having asthma, it's exacerbated by mold in their apartment, right? So the presenting complaint is asthma and treating that asthma, but that also depends on safe housing, policies for affordable housing, advocacy to make sure that individuals who are providing housing are following local ordinances and rules, making sure that people don't become unhoused in the process of advocating for them, right? So all of these systems and interactions are very complex. And so it's a way of laying out what systems are involved in what I'm doing right now. Where does the funding come from? Where do the people come from? And how do those things interact? And then understanding more of those interactions and getting curious and learning more about that. And then leadership. Physicians are leaders in the healthcare environment, and their leadership often sets the tone for how everyone takes care of those patients, right? Leadership starts at the top, and physicians are often prominent members of the healthcare team and need to have good leadership skills. And so in what ways can you develop leadership skills? And I'm not saying run for president of every club on campus, because maybe you're not actually developing leadership skills if you do that, right? But what does it mean to lead a group of people toward a cause? What does it mean to clarify something and move it forward? How do we manage conflict? Those are some really important skills to develop as a pre-med student. What is the purpose of a personal statement? I do have a blog. It's called Tough Love for Your Personal Statement. It's on Loyola University Chicago's website, Reflective Med Ed. It was one of the first things that I wrote. And it's used a lot to just sort of help students understand what it is we're looking for, right? We're looking for a picture of you that is an embodiment of your application and your passion, right? We're definitely looking for hints about your character. We want to know your story. We want to know who you are and why you want to be a physician. Yeah, we want to know what your mission is. What's important to you? Why are you doing this? The spoiler alert for this was, I thought when I applied to my PhD program that I was done and I would never have to write a personal statement again. And I was like, clicking my heels up the street until I had to apply for my first dean job, and they asked for a cover letter and a career statement. And I was like, this is just another way of saying personal statement. This is so unfair, right? So they ask you for a teaching statement of your teaching philosophy. This is the same thing. Who are you in the classroom? What's important to you? What do you teach and why? What are your teaching methodologies? What have you learned as a teacher? What have students taught you over the years? Those are the things that make the opportunity to share something like that on the page come alive in a search process, where the goal of our cover letters, when we send in our cover letters and resumes or CVs for jobs, is you want to get an interview, right? You want to make it to that next level. And it's the same for your personal statement for medical school, for residency, for fellowship and jobs and beyond, is really to give us a sense of who you are. We have all your credentials. We see what your achievements are. We want to know why you did those things. So again, I call it the meaningless donut, and we all love donuts, probably. But you don't want to say, I did all these things because I want to be a doctor, and I want to be a doctor because I did all these things, right? And that's generally the template that people use for a personal statement. They say, I love medicine because I love science and people. I volunteered in so-and-so's lab. I volunteered in a clinic and I talked to people a lot. I did a little community service, learned a lot of great things along the way. And now I really want to be a doctor. Right. So it's kind of like I went on this exploratory journey because I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Then I did all these things and now I for sure want to be a doctor. But we never really got the why. Right. So it is a process to write a personal statement. It is not an event. Journaling along the way in real time can really help. Paying attention to surprise, disappointment, discomfort, are three really good ways to reflect and gain insight on your experiences, right? Maybe you're an EMT, you go on an ambulance ride and you enter into a house and you're like, man, I'm really uncomfortable. Why am I uncomfortable, right? Okay, well, it stinks in here. Okay, like sit with yourself and interrogate yourself. Get curious about yourself, your emotions, your reactions, so that you can learn more about how you are showing up. What resources do you have in your life to help you succeed? Someone mentioned family support before, which I think is awesome. And I do want to acknowledge that I think even, and I write about this in my book too, the journeys of pre-med students are not monolithic. And the journeys of pre-med first-gen students are not monolithic either. And so there are lots of versions of families and challenges that we either receive or can be mitigated by our families of origin. And so I wrote about two students that I worked with, one who came from a very toxic family, right? A family that was subjected to so much structural violence that over generations it had really become ingrained in her family. And so she was being victimized by the structural violence of society, but also by her family's internalization of replicating that structural violence. And another student who was a first gen who came from a relatively stable lower middle class family and had a lot of family stability and a very strong launch pad from which to sort of go after his goals, right? He had to learn how to navigate. There was a lot of things that he didn't know, but he didn't have forces working against him the way that the other student that I shared her story did. So I love it. So conferences, YouTube, of course. I have a channel. I've been relatively lazy about my channel, but I've been a med school dean, a med school admissions dean, and student life dean. And so in leaving my my past institution, my students asked me to like give them a weekly pep talk because I would sometimes go to their classroom or in our meetings and just give them a pep talk. And so I have some videos on Med School Minute that have all sorts of things around comparison and mindset, and they're just like 1 or 2 minutes. And so if you want to, you can find those on YouTube. They're called Nakae's Med School Minute. But yes, YouTube is great. There's tons of tutorials. You can always find a how-to video on how to do something, right? Free online resources like Khan Academy, absolutely. Mentors and tutors in school, like big SIB programs, student peer mentoring programs, fellow students that share the same experience, absolutely. I don't think that I would have got through my PhD program had it not been for the other 2 first gens that I went to my and got my PhD with. Dan and Eliza were incredibly just a shoulder to lean on. We were able to commiserate about our experience. Dan went through the year before Eliza and I did and finished his prospectus. He said, let me just send you a copy of my prospectus so you can just see what it looks like, right? Like, and then I saw it and I was like, oh, I could do this. Like, I could take my topic and it's 25 pages. I'm like, okay, this is really doable. But just having someone being willing to share, like, here's a little peek into what's next, like that was completely invaluable in giving me the confidence I needed to move forward. Family, friends, classmates, school's counselor, the internet, right? Thank God for that. What did people do before that? I have no idea. I lived at it. The internet was invented in my lifetime and I still don't remember. You know what we did? We looked things up in the library, like on actual paper, and had to like go to the library to find facts about things. College teachers, absolutely. Folks in education who are dedicated to us. I have been just absolutely blessed with amazing teachers over the course of my entire life, even going all the way back to I'm Facebook friends with my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Turney. She taught every single kid in my class. We lived in my family. We lived in the same place for 16 years. And so all of us went through kindergarten at this little elementary school. And just very grateful for what teachers invested in me, the critical feedback they gave me, how they helped me grow. And we have so many great resources. So wonderful. Successful students access resources. The students who are not, they're sort of like, oh, I just woke up like this, I don't study, and I walk in and get an A. They're liars. For sure. They're studying something, they're getting resources somewhere. Maybe those resources are not visible and they're able to do it behind closed doors. They have a sibling who's in medical school or who's a pre-med student. But really, the Writing Center is there because it's a resource on campus that individuals on campus decided should be budgeted for because it's needed. And same with the math lab, and same with the counseling center, and same with the rec center, right? All of these resources you're paying for them with your tuition dollars. So it would really be like sitting down to a meal and ordering like 5 plates of food and being like, okay, I'll pay for all 5 of these, but I'm only going to eat a little bit off this 1 plate. The rest of it, I'm just not going to utilize, right? So use the resources that you have on campus, especially things like the counseling center. Both of the first-gen students in my book availed themselves of counseling, and it was such an important step in understanding their emotional connections, their inner landscapes, their motivations, but also resolving trauma, right? All of us have trauma with big T or little t. It can be little things over time. It doesn't have to be large, but there are things that shape our reactions and how we respond in certain situations. And understanding ourselves is a big part of being ready to do the work of being a caregiver and a phenomenal physician in the future. Boundaries are really key. I have been working on boundaries since my late teens. I came from a family that did not do boundaries well. And so understanding what some of those relationship skills look like. Can we name things like manipulation and gaslighting and ways that healthy boundaries are the distance at which I can love myself and you fully, right? So letting you too close takes away from me, right? Undermines my goals. I got to move that boundary, and being able to say no, being able to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. One of my mentees really struggled with her family of origin and boundaries around money, because anytime anyone in her family had money, everyone just descended on that person and expected that person to give the money to them. Sisters texting, I found a treadmill. Can I have this? You have so much money. How come you don't just give me some, right? And she's like, I'm saving up. I got to take tests. I got to apply. I need a little money in the bank for a rainy day in case my car breaks down. Lots of reasons to save money, but had never really been privy to what those boundaries look like, right? And to have people say, you're turning your back on us, and you're selfish, when these are departures that can be really, really challenging. So talking with other folks about what that looks like, and having a therapist or a counselor to walk you through that. Again, it's like being able to peek into, so what do other people do? Right? Is this normal? Because we sort of grow up thinking everything that we do within our families of origin is normal. And it's not until you get an outside perspective that you go, you do that differently. Okay, there's another way of handling that. I have a little bit in my book about vetting advice carefully, and I think that that's important. The chapter on sort of the part about how to work with your advisor is in the first gen section, because I think advisors very often mean well, and are trying to do their jobs. They may not understand fully what their jobs are supposed to be, and can be very discouraging and often give advice that is not necessarily accurate or applicable to a student situation. So make sure that when you accept advice, the person understands your goals, who you are, and where you're coming from. And I give some examples in the book of sort of what that looks like, and how to be thoughtful about weighing advice that's given to you. Diversity within and between among first-gen students is, I already talked about that, but I do think it's worth repeating. Our experiences are very similar, but they're not the same. And so the challenges that come up, we can share a lot of strategies and resources for how to do that, but we also have to remember that the intersectionality of our identities across first-gen and immigrant and language and race and ethnicity is really complex. Our community is beautifully diverse. Okay, so interested if, let's see, I don't know if these are from today. Okay, so if you failed and had a horrible first year in college, how do you make up for those mistakes as a first-gen student? You just do the best you can from this point forward, right? I've seen a lot of people get into medical school whose first and or second year of school is really abysmal. And then the committee goes, okay, but that was a long time ago, right? So here's what they've done recently. Here's their most recent performances in the classroom. These are what their professors say about them. There's absolutely nothing that you can do to erase your previous academic record. You can only show growth from where you are. And we see that when we look at the application. We see the trend and the trajectory, and it's okay. So don't think of it as making up for mistakes. Think of it as continuing to grow. And I will tell you that I have seen more people struggle in medical school who never made a mistake before med school than people who had made mistakes before medical school. So that is, many of our post-bac applicants or more academically gritty applicants have failed before. And so when they fall a little bit short, they go, oh, I've been here. I know how to dig deep, and I can do this, right? Versus someone who's never struggled and hasn't hit that level of discomfort or fear, and they start to stumble and they go, oh my God, I'm a total fraud, I can't be here. And they just completely flip out, right? So mistakes help us build resilience and teach us about ourselves. And so I always say, leave the ashes and take the fire. Whatever burned down, whatever mistake that was, leave it. Take the fire of what you learned with you and move forward. As the first-gen student, what were you too excited about? I don't know if that means like for my career. I think I just was really fascinated by just meeting people who did cool things for a living. Probably curiosity is maybe one of my superpowers, and an annoying feature that I have sometimes, overthinking things. But I do love meeting people from all walks of life. And so it does amaze me, my own journey, that I know people who are partners at law firms and who run very successful multi-million-dollar businesses, and who are chiefs of staff for elected officials. My best friend is the national director of the Shriver Center for Poverty Law. And I'm like, it just amazes me, the walks of life that people come from. And at the same time, have met amazing apprentices in the pipe fitters union that my husband works in, right? And also have had phenomenal college students in my house, meetings for undocumented students through Pre-Health Dreamers, just breaking bread at my table and hearing their stories. It's just as amazing and just as fascinating to me. Let's see. What are some of the rules of the game that you think first-gen students should know? The ones about the GPA that are in the book are important. So know how your MCAS GPA is calculated. A W is better than an F or a D. Being able to appraise, like, how am I doing in this class and should I withdraw? Pass-fail courses and Ws are not calculated into your GPA. So if you are concerned and want to preview a course and they don't allow auditing, which is just like paying a fee to kind of sit in the classroom, but you don't get to take any of the tests, you just get to sort of shadow the class. Some schools allow that and some schools don't. You can take it for credit, no credit, or pass, no pass. And take it and either pass it or don't, but that doesn't get added into your GPA. It'll still show up as a fail in the pass-fail section on the bottom. So you don't want to fail anything, to be clear, but it will not actually get added into your GPA. So then if you wanted to take it again for credit, you've seen it once before, you've gone through it, like, that's also okay. One of my first-gen students had really limited exposure to chemistry, didn't take it in high school at all, went to a school that didn't have labs and was like, I'm not jumping straight into organic chemistry. So they took a lab class, like an introduction to chemistry, and then audited the chemistry, the Gen Chem course, and then took the course, right? So, okay, I think I have like enough language and comfortability around chemistry, enough exposure to it that I can really jump in and like learn instead of feeling really disoriented about what is all this stuff, right? So really understanding some of those nuances. Another really great tip is that all the classes that you take for college credit are calculated into your AMCAS GPA, and that is the GPA that schools will see when they adjudicate your application. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need those classes for your major at your school. So let's say you're a student in Cal State Long Beach and you go back to Harupa Valley for summers, stay with your family. You might take some classes at College of the Desert, like maybe physics over the summer at College of the Desert because you're a psych major at Cal State LA and you don't need that class towards your finishing your psych major, but you need it for med school, right? So as long as the narrative of you doing that makes sense, and you don't concurrently take courses at two different institutions, that is, don't be a student at Stanford fall semester and take physics fall semester at Redwood City College, because then we see on your transcript, why don't you just take that at where you are already enrolled, right? Then it sort of looks like you're shopping around for Easy Street, which is not great. But a lot of students do stuff over the summer or graduate and then finish up a couple of their prereqs because it's cheaper to take them at a Cal State school or a state school or a community college. Extension school, that's all okay. So that's another really good thing to know is if you are on Rate My Professor and the rule, like, this class not only is poorly taught, but people hate it and it doesn't seem like people even really learn. Find another option, right? Be really in charge of your own academic journey. Again, it's performance and the learning. We have to pay attention to both of those things. So even if they're like, oh, it's a really easy A, super easy, physics, whatever, like you don't really have to do any work. Well, that's not going to help you get ready for the MCAT, right? So the learning, the performance part might be fine, but the confidence that you're going to build from doing hard classes is not going to be gained. And you're also not going to get the content that you need in order to be successful in the MCAT later on. Let's see. When you publish your books, how were your reactions like? I think that, like, for just my family and friends are like, awesome. My dad said it looked like a children's book. I was like, thanks, Dad, appreciate it. But I think it's been fairly well received. I like just being able to give it to people because, again, it's like all of my advice. Like, if I could spend all day with you just telling you, like, this is what I've learned working with pre-med students for 20 years, this is what it would be. I did receive a really nice compliment from Linda Abrams, who runs the consulting firm called Accepted. She actually is a paid consultant that helps people get into graduate schools and professional schools. And I was a guest on her podcast, and she said, I never endorse books or recommend books, in this field. But she said, but I wholeheartedly recommend yours. And I think that was a very high compliment, from someone. And I think it's just because it's practical. And again, it's your stories, it's student stories. I've just given your stories back to you. And I've learned from those stories, and students' journeys have enabled me to actually see the nuances of the application and what we need to do differently, because I've suffered those setbacks and defeats and rejections and reapplications, and also had the benefit of working with pre-med students, seeing their applications go through the admission cycle, and then working with them as med students on the other side in student life. So it was also great to see the important aspects of preparation that carried through into a successful medical student career, and then eventually, matching into specialty. Do you think being a first-gen student can be an advantage when you're applying to medical school? I absolutely do. I think first-gen students bring perspectives that often are missing from medicine, that are important for relating to patients and working with communities. There are indicators on the application for that, for a reason, because we want to be able to use data to inform our decisions. I can show you some of the socioeconomic indicators on the application in a little bit, if you'd like. How do you overcome age discrimination? I do think that there's age discrimination in the process somewhat, but very often we don't necessarily pull the data to look at someone's birthday. Most medical schools have a very broad span of age of students. I know at my school, we have students that are in their late 30s and early 40s. One of the students when I was at University of Utah was 50 something. She raised like 6 kids and then went to med school. And so she actually was in med school at the same time as her youngest son. So I think it's out there, but it's also about, again, what you bring to the table, what your passion and purpose is. And schools see the value in life experiences and rich perspectives that students that have lived on the planet longer than some of our younger students have brought. How old is too old for medical school? I don't think I can really answer that, right? Like, it's really up to those admissions committees to determine if the passion and the skills that you bring to the profession have merit, and whether they have a place in serving patients moving forward. I do think that, and I talk about this in the book too, it's about sort of what kind of a difference do you want to make in the world? And is there a way to accomplish that through some other means, right? So I met a student at a college. I was doing recruiting, and they came, and they had been in a med school program like 20 or 30 years before, and were still thinking about trying to get back into medical school because a bunch of things happened. They got sick, and then they got divorced. And so I asked, like, so what are your goals? I want to help my community live healthier, and I want to prevent heart disease, and I want to talk about nutrition. And I was like, you don't learn any of that in medical school. I was like, that's like public health, and that's like health literacy and health education. And I was like, there's whole fields well beyond an MD degree where you will do that every single day. Like, if that's what you want to do every day, then that's not actually medicine, right? Like, taking care of people in that way is very different than clinical medicine. When do you recommend someone to do a post-bac versus a master's degree if they cannot get into medical school? I have to always just look at the application and the student's journey, but some of the things I think about is what kinds of preparation, how does the student assess their preparation and what they need to move forward, right? So some people have really good grades, but they don't feel ready. So they want to do a post-bac program to get more exposure to like pathology, pharmacology, physiology, genetics, so they feel more prepared for medical school. Some people's performance, they feel prepared, but their performance doesn't look as strong, and so they want to necessarily do a post-bac program. Many of the post-bacs are special masters, so you are still awarded a master's degree. Those are the ones that I recommend, simply because they're expensive. So paying $50,000 and spending a year of your life for a certificate that really doesn't have much value on the job market is risky. And I think even in some ways institutionally irresponsible, unless there's some sort of a guaranteed interview or guaranteed seat, like contract or something from participating in the post-baccalaureate program. So master's degrees are great. Post-bac, special masters, post-bacs are also great. The one that I would add a little bit of nuance around is public health. It's a health adjacent degree. It's wonderful. It's a great skill to have and a good skill to learn. But if you need to improve your BCPM, your biology, chemistry, physics, and math GPA, the subset science GPA in your MCAS application, there's usually only 2, maybe 3 courses in the Masters of Public Health that are coded as BCPM. So you will need to do additional electives or additional coursework to beef up your science GPA if you're going to do a Master's in Public Health. Lots of students do that. It's great, but just pay attention to the courses that you're taking, because I think it's only biostatistics and epidemiology that are actually coded as science courses for the MPH. But again, it's about passion, right? It's about passion. I've had students do master's degree in business and master's degrees in education before applying to medical school. And they did a few science courses on the side to kind of improve their science GPA, but their focus was on something else because that's what they were really interested in doing, right? Wanted to go into academic medicine, or really interested in the business side of medicine, improving efficiency for underserved communities. Does being a community college student a disadvantage? I will say that if a school, an admissions committee or a medical school, holds it against you that you have attended a community college, they do not have a culture that recognizes your gifts, and you probably don't want to go there anyway. So at most schools, going to a community college is not a disadvantage. They will look at that in the context of all of the other things within your application. Particularly in California, I think that we have respect for students that start at community college. The transfer rate at community colleges is low, so it does represent striving and determination to be able to go to a community college and then transfer to a 4-year institution, get your footing all over again in a new setting, and succeed and earn your degree. So I do not think it's a disadvantage at all. At most medical schools, it's not. But if a school is very snobby about a student having gone to a community college, then I would say they don't deserve that gem of a student, and they probably don't have a culture that's welcoming and inclusive. It sounds a little elitist to have that as an attitude. So how important is volunteering? I have thousands of hours working, but no volunteering. Again, I think it depends on the school and the mission and how they construct their admissions indices. In general, at least some volunteering is important. However, I think the pandemic has helped us have more conversations with admissions professionals about the structural limitations and realities of many of our students. The truth is, depending on your background, it costs money to volunteer, right? And a lot of faculty members are like, volunteering is free, it doesn't cost you anything. Yes, it does, because when you volunteer those hours, you can't get paid for those hours, right? And if you have a certain amount of hours that you need to work in order to make your bills and support yourself and your loved ones, then that can be a significant burden. I do think that there's creative ways to get volunteer hours. You can volunteer to be an operator or like a crisis line counselor or questions and answers line counselor, and you do that by signing up remotely, and you're able to then get calls routed to your phone during a certain shift. So I had a student volunteer for a healthy sex education line, like text line. So they would answer texts and provide factual information about sex for teens. They didn't have to go anywhere or drive anywhere. They could sort of do it almost at any time. So they'd say, okay, I'll answer text between like 5 and midnight, right? And this is when I'll sort of be on shift. That same thing happens for things like sexual assault response teams, where you're sort of like on call Poison control sometimes has different volunteer avenues, suicide prevention and hotline. So often there's a training that you have to go through initially. And once you're trained, you can do things remotely. So again, get curious and creative about ways that you can give back if your time is limited, and think about how to get at least some things that are volunteering on your application. That said, if your application is strong and you've been working and you have a story and you're passionate and that comes through, there are committees that will definitely consider that and will look at the overall background of a student. I had a student that is now a physician that applied to my very first class at Loyola, and they didn't have a lot of volunteer hours, probably almost none, at least in the last 4 years. And their application was very thin, not a lot of experiences. So when we went through our rubric and kind of gave them, sort of points in specific areas around research and volunteering, leadership, and whatever was on our rubric. But the reviewers rated the application really highly. And when I looked at it, I noticed that the student had become an emergency foster parent for their niece and nephew when their sister and brother-in-law were incarcerated and struggling with drugs. And so they became a parent of 2 young children in undergrad, finished undergrad and did a master's degree while parenting until their sister and brother-in-law could recover and their niece and nephew could be returned and reunited with the parents. Our values at Loyola was looking for people who were like a person for others, right? Like who is living these values of justice and love for other people. He definitely met the criteria. We said, this is a person for others who's demonstrated that by his actions. And the committee absolutely loved his application. And he's a physician today. So yeah, there are rules, but it also, your application is your application and your story and your journey is your own. What is my opinion on going into med school right from undergrad? It's not for everyone. Some people can't wait and are good and are not burned out and feel like, put me in, coach, I'm good to go. And for some people, they need to take a break. And I think it just depends. Almost more than half of the people take at least 1 year off. Now, it used to be that more than half of the people went straight through, and that has completely shifted the other direction to the majority of people actually take a gap year, a glide year, a growth year, whatever you want to call it, a catch your breath and work at Starbucks year. As long as you have a plan for circling back to your goals, it really doesn't hurt you to take time off. And in fact, today, I think students are much more thoughtful about how they want to spend their time before they make that 4-year commitment to medical school, because there's not great opportunities to step away once you start medical school. Does it look bad to be in community college for more than 2 years? No. And honestly, again, when we're thinking about how do I appear to someone else? If your journey was to be in community college for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, right? Like one of my students who's now at UCR, is a single mom, parenting, spent a lot of time in community college, took a really long time to graduate from undergrad, is now second year medical student, right? That was her journey. So if you think, well, what should I do because that looks bad? Well, there's nothing that you can do about it, right? That was what was in front of you. You did the best you could with what you had. So really try to just honor where you are, do the best you can with what's in front of you, and your authentic self and purpose that comes through on your application, then people are not going to split hairs about how long it took you to do something. And we don't have any sort of measuring things where we say, well, this person did their degree in 4.1 years, then this person 4.5. So we're going to take the person who did it faster. That's not part of our thinking, right? We're looking at everything together and what kind of growth. There are sometimes people who do it really fast and sort of show up at our door and we go, you did all these things because you want to be a doctor, and you want to be a doctor because you did all these things, right? And we're not quite sure that they have the passion and the groundedness to really get the most out of becoming a student at our school. And so sometimes we don't say no, we say not yet, because that preparation is really a comprehensive look at whether someone is ready for that. So I think we got all the questions. Oh, how do you we talked about that one. Discrimination. Great. Okay, there might be some questions here in the Q&A.
You answered all of them.
Okay, awesome. Great. So are there any other questions? I know we're probably coming close to the time.
There's one question. I work in healthcare and don't have time to volunteer. Would that hurt me?
Yeah, so I think healthcare experience is good. Like I had mentioned before, some volunteering is important, but it also just depends on your situation and what kinds of things you're doing in healthcare. Usually our goal in asking you to volunteer is sort of like step back. Like, what are you supposed to get out of volunteering, right? Exposure to the world, interacting with people who are different from you, understanding a little bit more about yourself, showing that you're a person for others, that you're altruistic. So if those qualities and characteristics come through in what you do for paid work, and you're able to communicate that effectively to the committee, then, and you have reasons why you have these financial obligations that you can't step away and volunteer, then I think committees would weigh that and would certainly, try to be as equitable as possible in weighing your candidacy. But if you are able to find some things to do, volunteering, even if they're remote or online tutoring or, elementary school reading programs, things like that, I would definitely try and find some time to do that, because you'll grow and it'll also be really fun.
There's another question. What is the best way to come back after a rejection from medical school?
That's a great question. I have a chapter in my book for reapplicants, and I think it's a good time to check in with yourself about how did I approach this before? What was successful about my approach? What was not? The kind of gut check of like, do I want this, and do I want it for the right reasons? And what am I willing to do to recover from this? I'd offer some reassurance that a lot of people have to reapply, right? 4 out of 10 people are going to get a seat the first time around. And 6 out of 10 people are going to have to reapply. So each application should be submitted with sort of a 2-tiered plan, right? I'm submitting my application and I'm continuing to grow, so that if I end up having to reapply, I can hit my growth arc and represent the growth that I've had over that application year and until the next year. And the beauty of that is the more you continue to work on yourself, the even more ready you'll be for medical school if you get in the first time, or you'll be that much stronger of an applicant when you end up having to reapply. But definitely seeking feedback from schools. There's a lot that we can forensically deduce about your application. So if you do a post-app, analysis and you say, okay, I applied to 21 schools and I submitted secondaries to all of them, I didn't get any interviews. Well, then we know it's something about your application, right? We know it's something about your application that's not making that first cut. So is there something in the way that your academic record is presented? Is it something about your experiences? Is there something like, what about that? Did you apply too late, right? So then we can kind of work our way backwards and try to understand. So then let's say you got interviews and you didn't get any acceptances. What happened in the interview process? What about your interviewing skills? How did you follow up? Like trying to sort of work backwards and say, what can I learn about how far I got in the process at each of those schools? We didn't do a lot of post-app counseling. We tried to make it a priority at Loyola to do it for students who interviewed with us and didn't get in, because we felt like that meant they were really prepared and they needed the critical feedback that maybe we were one of the only schools that would be willing to provide that for them. And so we would give them generic feedback about things that they could work on. And then, do keep in mind that if you use up 20 minutes of an admissions counselor's time and you ask for critical feedback, and then you apply again and you don't implement any of the critical feedback they gave you, that admissions counselor is going to say in the meeting when they see your application again, I told them to do this, this, and this. It doesn't seem like they really implemented any of those things. And so, you do enter into a contract of accountability when you ask for feedback. And I think it's a good thing all around to try and see if you can get some information from schools about where you fell short and where you could improve.
The other one is, does doing your post-bac at a community college can hurt you?
I wouldn't say it can hurt you. I think it's really common in California. We call it the DIY post-bac. For a lot of people that are working and they just can't afford the 35 to 50 grand for a post-bac program, doing those courses at a community college makes sense. You need to learn the material and you need to perform well. And you need to also show on the MCAT, there's a little bit more pressure on the MCAT when you go that route, because they want one more piece of data that's going to demonstrate that you're prepared in that coursework in real time. So it can be made up a little bit by getting, you know, at least average or better on the MCAT. You don't have to have like 520s, right? But we just want to make sure that you're around at least the 50th percentile. You get a lot of consideration at many schools being in at least the 50th percentile for the MCAT. And then some schools will even go one standard deviation below that, depending on the mission, the kinds of supports they offer, and what their data tells them about how students with those numbers perform in their curriculum. So, but I definitely think a lot of students that I've worked with have done extension schools, community college type postbacks. And again, learning the material and getting prepared is the name of the game. So if those courses are more accessible because you've got to work and you have other responsibilities, that's what's available to you, then do your best and show us what you got.
Great. Does anybody have any other questions? You could type it up in the Zoom Q&A or the Slido. Slido? And if not, we'll let our speaker go and eat dinner.
I actually have to drive to Palm Springs. I'm speaking tomorrow, the American College of Physicians Southern Region meeting, which is like a hybrid meeting, but I've never been to Palm Springs. I've lived in this area
What?
for a while.
You live in Riverside and you've been to...
We got here and then like it was crazy and then the pandemic hit. And so we haven't explored. And so, yeah, my teen driver is gonna practice his driving.
Oh boy.
Yeah, thank you.
Best of luck.
Yes.
All right. Anybody have any questions?
I just wanted to mention one more thing. So on the screen, I put my email, premedprepadvice@gmail.com. I do free pre-med community chats and group advising sessions every second Sunday of the month from 11 to 12:30. And it's on Microsoft Teams. So if you email premedprepadvice@gmail.com, you'll get an automatic reply that gives you the link. And then you just can join. I don't send reminders. I don't spam anybody. It's like, it's your job to keep track of it and put on your calendar and show up if you want advising. I'm always surprised that sometimes we have a relatively small group, like 10 or 12 people.
PreMedAdvice@gmail.com?
PreMedPrepAdvice@gmail.com. Yeah. Here, I'll put the screen up one more time. You can see the screen. Yeah, so that's my just kind of advising. It's the same email that's in the book too, because I wanted an email response for the book as well. So you're welcome to join those chats. Usually I do half an hour, 15 minutes to half an hour of like some sort of instruction. Like we talked about secondary applications last week or last session. I think this session we're going to talk about following up and a little bit more about interview skills and preview some MMI scenarios and things like that. And then I just answer questions and students connect with each other. It's a safe space to ask questions and to kind of support the journey. And I've just had to kind of limit a lot of my advising to group advising once a month because I have so many other things to do. But I love this work and I can't give it up. So that was my solution to sort of being able to continue to support pre-meds. Yeah, and when you send an email, you don't have to write a love note. You can just say Sunday chat and then just shoot it off and you'll just get an automatic reply. So don't stress out about, oh no, I'm writing an email to Dr. Like, no, just, you can even just put blah or hi or anything. It'll still give you an auto reply. Great.